great seeing all of you here. It's, I should have taken admission. But it's great to be home, and I call Wongs my home. Even though I've been away for many, many years, it's still my home. And to see all these familiar faces, these friends, it's heartwarming. It really is. And it's the year of the golden rabbit, which is shown on that screen there. And in the Chinese tradition, it's a year that is symbolic of harmony, of stability, and of prosperity. And if you got harmony and stability, then prosperity will follow. And I think it's pretty fitting for this gathering here today, and of our country of Canada. We have a harmonious and a stable country, and we certainly are one of the most prosperous countries in the world. And I think it was probably one of the reasons why my forefathers came. And the story started in 1898. And some of the great research that this organization, this museum, has done is quite remarkable. I'm finding out things that I didn't know about our family. Possibly some of these things that I don't want to know about our family. But some of the questions are probably going to be filled in by the research done here as to why my great-grandfather came, how he came, and why he settled in Olds. These are questions that are still puzzling to me and my brothers and my sisters. And I'd like to introduce my brother, Stewart. Where's Stewart? Stewart. And my lovely wife, Carol. And my brother Stan, he's in Phoenix and sends his good wishes. My sister May is in Calgary. My sister Frances is in New York. My uncle Ed is in Toronto. So we're spread all over the country, but as I mentioned, Olds is still my home. So that's when the story began in 1898, and I think the reason why my great-grandfather Wong Yet came here, because there were some tough times in China at that time, and the gold fields were still being developed in California, and there was a nickname for it, for North America. It was called Gumshan, which means gold mountain. And that's why the Chinese came to be gold miners, but they ended up being service people. And that's where they made their gold, not from mining, but providing services to the gold miners. And when that was over, they came to build a railway in Western Canada. And my great-grandfather on my mom's side was a railway navvy. But I think my great-grandfather Wong Yet was a merchant, and he came here, and why he settled in Olds is still a mystery. So perhaps Michael can find out in the archives of why that happened. So he came here in 1898, and he established a business. And then in the early 1900s, my grandfather, Wong Pon, came. And then in 1918, he established the Public Lunch Cafe, which is still existing to today. And we have several photos of our old family memoirs and archives. I believe they're spread around.
They are, yes.
Great. This is a very informal meeting, and if I get too long-winded, some of you just get a hook and drag me off. Mary Ann, you're a teacher, you can do that. And if there's any questions, please just ask, and I'll do my best ability to try and answer. So the restaurant business started in the early 1900s. And then my father came over in about, I think it was the 1920s. And it was through almost an arranged marriage that he met my mother in Victoria. And she was a Chinese school teacher. And women of Chinese descent could not go to English school at that time. There were a lot of restrictions, and that was one of them. But she was qualified to teach Chinese. And she became a Chinese school teacher. And from some of the pictures I've seen of Mom when she was a young woman, she was just a knockout. And my dad often referred to her as my princess. But She was a teacher, Marianne, and she tried to teach us Chinese, you see. And when you write Chinese, it has to be in a certain order. And she had a big stick, and if I made a stick in the wrong order, whack, it was a finger. So capital punishment was certainly not uncommon back in those days. And my older brothers and sisters went to Chinese school in Victoria, and when they got to me, they kind of forgot about me. So, and it was funny that I was the one that ended up doing business in China. That's ironic. But the public lunch was established in 1918, and it did quite well. It did, and it was a meeting place for the ranchers, the farmers, the hockey players. It was a gathering place where the community could come and get a square meal. And I remember we had a furnace in the middle of the restaurant and a big warming platform, and that's where everybody would come and get warm when it was about -40, you know. And it was, my memories of it are very fond, and I think that our family's memory of this town are extremely fond. And I was just chatting earlier with this young lady here, and we were neighbors. And one of our neighbors, Mrs. Chambers, and her husband was a partsman at Kemp's, I believe. And my mom had a big string of laundry out one day, and this was wind blown. There was no such things as electric gas dryers or electric washers. Electric washers maybe. But the string broke under the load, and we didn't know about it. And Mrs. Chambers came and washed the whole load and dried it on her line and gave it back to Mom. And I thought, what a beautiful thing to do. And I've never forgotten her for that. And that's the kind of relationship that we established in the towns. There was a rancher, a trapper called Frenchy, who lived out in the west part of town. And I remember my dad told me the story that Frenchy came in one time, and it was a pretty bad year for trapping. And he needed a loan. He needed a grub stake. So he knew my dad. He says, Frank, I've got no money to survive the rest of the year, and I'd like to give you this gun as deposit if you would loan me a few dollars. And my dad said to him, Frenchy, you can't manage to be a trapper or hunter without your gun. Here's the loan. Don't worry about a deposit. And I remember Frenchy was a lifelong friend of my father's. And as kids, we used to go out to his cabin, and he always promised to bring me a bear cub for a pet. Well, they never did. But those are the kinds of relationships we had with people, and it was great. And for those of you that remember, Merle, you would remember this, that we were next to the Victoria Hotel, and there was a ramp on that you walked up towards the Victoria Hotel into the reception and the pub. So a lot of the ranchers and farmers would come in for a few quick beers, and the beers didn't turn out too quick. So, and they knew that. Funny, they knew that. So they would leave all their worldly possessions with my father, and they trusted him like he was a second bank. And that was pretty remarkable, I thought. That, and I was, as a kid, watching all these things, and I thought, gee, that's quite something to have a person leave a wallet, take a few dollars up to have enough to have a few beers on, and then leave all the groceries and everything. And I'd put the groceries, I was working when I was about 8 or 10 years old in a restaurant, which is apparently not allowed these days. Can't understand that. But I'd put all these groceries away in a cooler for them, and a couple hours later, the ranchers would come rolling down the ramp. I'd pick up their groceries and go home. But my dad would have their wallet and money for them, and it was just a different way that people related to each other. And it was great. It was really, really wonderful. So we all grew up in this town, and I must have walked by this telephone office 10,000 times because the restaurant was that way and our house was down this way. And we were all born at home. Dr. C.C. Hartland was our doctor. And he delivered us all at home, which is, again, quite remarkable. And his daughter, Helen Smith, is still a dear friend of ours. And by coincidence, again, she lives in a senior's home that's practically across the block from where I live in Calgary now. And they're going to celebrate her 90th birthday, I believe, in April. So this is where the town ties are so strong. I meet people, as a matter of fact, 2 weeks ago, I was coming out of a clinic in Calgary. The wife hit me with a baseball bat. I was patching up my eye. And I run into this couple, and this lady says to me, she said, "You're a Wong from Olds." And I said, "What did I do now?" She says, "I'm Kay Jensen." And she said, and I still ran a blank there. She says, "Kay, stop." And I said, "Okay, now I remember." And she was with her husband, Harold. And we ended up talking in the clinic there for must have been 10 or 15 minutes. And she was the one that told me that Helen Smith was her table mate at this senior's home. And I thought, "Oh, isn't that great?" Here they are meeting people out of nowhere. She recognizes me, and we have a great chat about things that happened 20, 50, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. And again, this is one of the joys of living in a town like Olds. So, as our family grew up, as we all grew up, I went away to school. My sisters and brothers all did that. But Stewart stayed home and helped Dad. And you know, he's still one of the best shots I've ever seen in my life. He can bring a goose down from miles up there. He can even shoot him in your barnyard, yeah. And in the fall, Stewart goes hunting. He goes hunting deer with my nephews, and they harvest them quite well. And he always tells me about the friends that we meet in Olds. And the high school reunions we've had here are just great. And I think what you're experiencing here is something that you don't get in cities. You just don't get that type of close community feeling and the way people grow up together. Mary Johansson and I went to school together. She was the smartest girl in the class. I still tell her that. So, I wanted to mention Heritage Park too. About 20 years ago, the management of Heritage Park came to our public lunch cafe, and they said, "Jim, we've been looking for a Chinese restaurant to put in Heritage Park for a long time. And do you think that your father or your brother would consider selling this restaurant to Heritage Park?" Well, he was still in business back in those days and doing quite a good business. And I said, "Well, I don't think so, but you can talk to him." Well, the sale didn't consummate, but what did happen was they came and measured everything, and they took countless pictures, and I've got a video of the restaurant. And there's a restaurant in Heritage Park called the Club Cafe, which is more a generic name. But the design is very, very similar to what our restaurant was back in the 20s. And one of the pictures you see here is a picture of Carol and myself in front of the Club Cafe in Heritage Park. And there's an old 1956 Buick there. And it was a Buick that my dad bought from Fred Richards, who had the Buick dealership up. I think it was called the College, College Service. And I remember when we bought that Buick, it was, I think, about $4,500. And it was a beautiful car. And there's one unfortunate thing, is my dad couldn't drive. So I had to drive it. And I took it to college that first fall, and I was cruising around the streets of Edmonton with a couple of friends of mine, Donnie Smith and Donnie McKinnon. And you could, I'll use the term loosely, you could pick up girls back in those days. And there would be no fear of any reprisals or anything. Well, We went out one evening, and I think we lost count at about 15 or 16. But I had that car restored, and I donated it to Heritage Park. And unfortunately, I donated it before they had the park for cars of that vintage. So they ended up selling it, which is fine. That's their prerogative. And as fate would have it, about 2 years ago, I was in a condo, must have been 500 units in Vancouver. And I was driving down in it. This condo was owned by friends of mine, and I was going to go to the car wash. So I drive by this car that's got a shroud over it. I said, I guess they're storing cars here. And I looked down, and there was a dual exhaust peeking out from underneath. I thought, I wonder. So I went down and lifted it up, and sure enough, it was my Buick. So there's a guy in Vancouver that bought it, and I found out who it was, and I talked to him, and he says, that's your car, eh? And I said, well, yeah, it was. He said, I'd love to know the history behind it. I says, can we go cruising some night? So these are some of the stories that I've enjoyed living in Wongs, and the Public Lunch was an institute that many of us were brought up in. It provided the income, our way of life for 5 generations. And it was a footprint of about 25 feet wide by about 130, 140 feet long. And it still exists today. And I've asked Andrew, the owner of the Public Lunch now, to bring over some goodies that we can share. And I didn't know there were so many people, but he said, I told him to double the order, so maybe he's on his way now. But we'll have a few refreshments that we can all share. Now, I'd like to answer any other questions that might come up, anything at all, anything that comes into your mind. But let me leave you with a bit of philosophy. And my dad was a philosopher. My granddad was as well, too. And I think that he instilled into me, my grandfather, a sense of business, because he developed cataracts in his later years. Couldn't read. And so when I was a kid, I used to go up to his apartment, which he lived up above the Public Lunch, and read the columns of the Financial Post, the stock quotations for him, when I was I think it was about 7 or 8 years old. So I'd be reading things like Kaminko, and he'd nod his head, read the price, and all these other shares. And he kind of taught me that investing in Canadian stocks was probably a good idea. And it has indeed been. Mind you, there's been a few duds too, but what the heck. But that's what my grandfather did. He instilled a sense of business, and my father instilled a sense of loyalty, of a devotion to community, and closeness between family. The family ties between our family are extremely strong. I had a Thanksgiving U.S. dinner with my sister Frances in New York and my daughter, and it's something we really, really enjoy. So here it is in New York, right in the middle of Manhattan, and we're celebrating a Thanksgiving dinner. And I thought, hey, this is great. Upstairs of the Public Lunch, there was a narrow stairwell that led into the kitchen, and upstairs my grandfather had his apartment, and that's where Ed, my Uncle Ed, built his model airplanes, and my grandmother Mary was the first Asian lady to graduate from the old School of Agriculture, and her picture is still in the walls at the School of Agriculture. I think it was a class of about 1915. Anyway, he had a big bathtub. He had running water there long before the rest of we did. And so to go upstairs was almost like going into the inner sanctum. And on the ceiling, they had that pressed metal ceiling type of tile, which you only find now in Heritage Park. And if you go to the Chinese restaurant in Heritage Park, they have that same tile. And I think they got that idea from our restaurant. And there were several small rooms up there where our staff lived. And there was, back in the old days, they used to rent those rooms out. So there were rooms for rent, there was our staff quarters, and that's where my grandfather and grandmother lived. And earlier in the days of the public lunch too, we had the pool hall, billiards hall, and we had the Mayfair Theater. And I remember, and Mary, you'd remember that. Remember Jeannie Miller, Ted Miller's daughter? She used to sell popcorn in the theater, and it was 10 cents a bag. And it was great popcorn that Jeannie made. And the pool hall, my father said, Jim, if you ever walk in that pool hall, you're going to be sorry. So I never had a chance to learn how to shoot pool there. Because he says people use bad language there. I said, oh, okay. So, but unbeknownst to him, I used to sneak in there from time to time. Our family always was interested in sports. My grandfather as well was an ardent curler. And he had a set of curling rocks that he used to store on that stairway on the way up into the second floor. And as a kid, I used to try and pick them up, and they're really heavy. Well, somewhere over the last 50 years, they disappeared, and I'm not sure where they ended up. But
the curling rocks are here.
Are they?
They're in the museum in a case.
Yeah, in a green case.
Yep, yep.
Well, I'll be there.
There you go.
Hey, that's great, Mike. Good to know. But my grandfather was an ardent supporter of the sports. My father was as well. The hockey team, the Olds Elks, used to meet, and my brother Stewart played for the Olds Elks in the Intermediate A. So he's got a whole bunch. And Merle, you remember those days?
There is
So again, my niece Tracy, Stewart's daughter, wrote a very appropriate piece to conclude. She said, Uncle Jim, home is where the heart is. And I think that's very appropriate, because our heart is in the town of Olds, and that's where our home is. Thank you very much.